there, and welcome to the How to Market Your Horse Business podcast. As you've likely guessed now, my name is Denise Alvarez, and I get the pleasure and honor of hosting you here each week. And before we dive into all things influencer marketing, I'm just going to give you a brief intro in case we're new friends, and then I promise we are diving in head first, all right? So as I said, my name is Denise Alvarez, and through my business, Storm Lily Marketing, I get to help dream-chasing horse business owners like yourself to see clearly through the marketing overwhelm so that you can create a cohesive plan for your social media, website, and email marketing so you can turn your online audience into your customers. Now, I do that through one-on-one coaching as well as through website design and website copywriting. Those are my primary services. But then I also get to be here on the podcast giving you free marketing help regularly. So be sure and go back and check out older episodes if we're new friends, because there's a ton for you here on the podcast. But my heart truly, whether it's through the podcast or through the one-to-one services I get to provide, is to help you be out in the arena or the barn or behind the camera lens doing more of what it is that you love in the world of horses. And so, especially here on this podcast, you can plan to get a mix of step-by-step strategies, essential how-tos, and entrepreneurial mindset shifts that will help you not only see what's possible for your horse business, but I'm also here to guide you through that process so you can make it happen. And so today, as I said, we are diving into influencer marketing. And I cannot wait to introduce you to my new friend, Megan Sullivan. We're actually talking about this topic because we've not yet covered it here on the podcast, and it's a big one, influencer marketing. Now, before you check out and think this episode is not for you because maybe your account size isn't huge or you're a smaller brand and you haven't considered influencer marketing, let me just tell you, I truly believe this episode is for every horse business owner. Okay, I want to open your eyes to some new ideas and possibilities. Because if you are a trainer or a rider, you could be considered an influencer, even if you don't have 200,000 followers. And if you're a maker or any kind of products that you are selling in the horse world, you're a brand that could benefit from working with an influencer. Because in this episode, you'll actually discover that an influencer is not just that fashion person or that health and beauty person that has 500,000 or even 1 million followers. We are all familiar with that idea of influencer marketing. However, that's a very narrow approach that could keep you from missing what is really a great opportunity. Because actually, I just saw this week, literally. It said that this is the year of what they have termed a micro-influencer, which is typically someone who has less than, say, 10,000 to 100,000 followers. That exact number, it really does fluctuate depending on who you ask, but I just want to give you an understanding that the size of your audience is not as important as the trust and the brand that you've built. Now, if we've been friends here on the podcast for very long, you know that's right at the heart of my message and what I believe and what I teach my coaching clients and here on this podcast. All right, so back to our guest. I met Megan just a few months ago, and when we first connected, I knew she would be a great person to have here on the podcast. Purely from an entrepreneurial standpoint, I'm telling you, she is someone to watch and learn from. But in addition to that, Megan has built an amazing tool that I know many of you are going to love and want to be a part of, called the Social Equestrian. Now, you're going to hear us dive more into that. I want you to understand what it's about and her heart behind it. And of course, we're going to give you some practical tips and strategies for how you can do influencer marketing in your business. But if you're curious about the Social Equestrian now, you can go ahead and go to stormlily.com/influencer, and it's going to take you straight there so that you can find out more and see if it's a good fit for you. Essentially, the Social Equestrian is going to be the place for equestrian brands and influencers to connect. All right, I will leave it at that. I'll let Megan tell you more during our chat. Now, I've broken this conversation with Megan down into 2 episodes because I want to speak to each audience specifically. So, in this first episode, you will first hear Megan's story because I always love to give my guests the opportunity to share their own personal story of getting into this entrepreneurial journey and this horse business journey and how she started her businesses. Yes, plural. And then we're going to give you some specific tips for marketing. First, it's going to be for influencers. And then next week, in the next episode, it will be specifically for brands who want to work with influencers. So we're giving you some very specific and practical tips, tools, and strategies because that's my heart here on the podcast. All right, so get your notebooks handy, friends, because I guarantee you are going to want to start applying the things you are learning. And of course, at any time, you can go to stormlily.com/137 to get the show notes for this episode, to get the links to Megan's websites, to the Social Equestrian, all the things. All right, so without further ado, let's dive into my conversation with Megan Sullivan. All right, Megan, I'm so pumped. Thank you so much for joining me here on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to speak with you more.
Oh man, me as well. I know that my audience is going to love this conversation. I mean, I was just telling you in our pre-conversation, I wish I was recording because you have so many golden nuggets to share. So before we dive into today's topic and even define influencers and influencer marketing and what we're talking about there, I would love first for my audience to get to know you. And I always like for my guests to do that intro themselves so they can just hear it in your voice and hear a bit of your story. So everybody has a very unique story of how they came into the space. I love yours. Tell us a little bit about how you came to become an equestrian and then to even become an entrepreneur with your own apparel brand and then a new product even coming out.
Absolutely. Well, summarizing a horse girl story is always challenging. So I'll try to keep it short and sweet and stick to the kind of the interesting bullet points. Because I do get a lot of people that kind of like double question to see if my story is even real, because I got into riding as an adult. So I did not grow up riding like, a lot of people in the equestrian space have. Sure, of course, I had a fake tree in my backyard that I pretended was a horse as a kid growing up. I put together a business plan to my parents of how much money we could save if we had a horse and they could eat our grass. I tried everything as a kid to get to ride, but it just never worked out. Right. And so then I continued to grow up and in my 20s, moved around a lot and didn't have an opportunity to do so. It wasn't until out in California, we actually met a realtor that was helping us buy a home. And she had a horse. And I remember like she was telling me about how she had a horse. And I'm like, oh my goodness, you must be a millionaire. Like, tell me more. I can't believe people own horses. That's crazy. And she's like, well, actually, where your house is kind of in a horse mecca area. And she's like, you'd be surprised at the ability to go take lessons someplace. And actually, it's not as expensive as you might think it is. She's like, how much do you pay for your gym membership? How much do you pay for this? And she's like, yeah, if you just allocated those funds to lessons, you could probably ride, once or twice a week and see if you like it. And I was like, really? And so I immediately go home and kind of Google horseback riding lessons near me. And she said, actually, no, you should go to this place where she actually took lessons in the past, because she's like, half of the world is navigating to know who to take lessons from and making sure you have a good experience, right? Because starting as an adult, again, it's challenging and they need to kind of teach you everything. And I remember showing up and not even knowing what side of the horse to get on. I mean, it was that special. And so then in this lesson that I think the trainer was she was just laughing. And, she tells me to pick up the posting trot, which of course I don't know what that is, but the horse does. And so I'm like trying to sit the posting trot and having no idea what I'm doing. And I just remember dismounting from that lesson. It was only about 35 minutes long. And I remember her face being like, well, hopefully you learned that this is not, a place for you because you struggled the entire time.
My
and
God.
I remember jumping off and being like, so when can I take lessons? And her face was like, what do you mean? You want more of this? You were awful. And I was like, it was so hard, but there's so many things, it's right there. What if I could learn to do this? That's so cool. And look at this animal. I was commanding this thing. This was, and so she's like, well, you can't be in group lessons because you can't even steer. And I was like, okay, well, what is that? I'll take private lessons. What are those? What outfit do I need to come back in? And I remember because I live really close to that barn. So it was only a 3-minute drive. And I purposely drove 15 minutes out of the way to go to the grocery store just so I could be in line in this clothing and have someone ask me oh, did you come from the barn? I just wanted to tell somebody else about how incredible it was. And at that time, I didn't obviously have a lot of friends in the equestrian space. It was just the freelitter. And so I just remember being like, could someone just please ask me, like, and sure enough, like, as I'm checking out the Trader Joe's, they always ask you what you did today. And I'm like, let me tell you what
Oh
I
my
did,
gosh, I love
and
it.
I was just so excited to like share that journey and share that experience. And so then, fast forward a little bit. So after that lesson, I continued to take lessons at that barn. This is also during COVID though, as far as the time frame. So a lot of barns had a lot of restrictions about who you could ride with and how often you could ride. So I ended up riding at 3 different barns total to be able to ride 5 to 6 days a week, because that's really what I needed in order to continue to grow as an equestrian. So from there, you know, fast forward to a month later, and I'm thinking it's a good idea that these lesson horses, they already know so much, right? So what if I own my own horse and we could learn together? So one of the trainers that I was riding with agreed to let me buy an off the track thoroughbred with only a month of riding experience under my belt. And this thoroughbred was 8 years old. So you can imagine how green and special he was. And she's like, listen, you're not going to advance as fast as you want, but you're going to learn twice as fast because you're going to be forced to. So a month after starting to ride, I got an off the track thoroughbred that we started to learn to ride together. So we'll call those the crazy landmarks, starting at the age of 35, buying an off the track a month into it. And I haven't looked back since, right? Like I feel like I've been drinking through a fire hose to learn, but that's how I've always been, like through immersion. And you kind of just have to put in the work to get the results. And I don't have a lot of the fear that I think a lot of adult amateurs have, because I came from riding street bikes and dirt bikes and a lot of other extreme sports. So to me, this actually doesn't seem that scary, even though, you're riding a prey animal very quickly and they can make very bad decisions. Anyway, so that's kind of a little bit about me. Yes, I'm, borderline crazy, but I love it. I don't think I've ever found something that I call it an infinity sport, because there's no such thing as the top, right? Like even these Olympians in an equestrian space, give them a different horse, change the weather. Like there's so many variables we can't control that each ride is so different. And that's what I thrive on, is having that like constantly changing environment, and the fact that as much as you put in, as much as you get out of it, and that you can incrementally make, progress and things of that nature. So we'll call that the discovery story of how I became an insane equestrian. But from there, so obviously I have a huge learning curve, right? And I'm aware of this. I don't know anything about anything. So what's the fastest way to learn immersion? Well, of course I want to be at horse shows, but I'm nowhere near the level of rider that needs to be at shows. And I don't have the income to be at shows. So that whereas I was like, oh, I could, be like a vendor at a show. What would I sell? Right. So I started to look around to see different things that people were using that I could create or improve on. And one of the things, again, this was during COVID, was the bandanas, like the masks that everyone had to wear while they were riding. I had purchased a couple as needed, and there was just little things about them that I just wish I could change. And one of the biggest things was I didn't like how regular bandanas, when you tie them behind your neck, you have like a lump of stuff behind your neck, your hair. There's just too much, right? And then the safety component of it, right? So if you were actually to come off of your horse, which as a new rider, you unfortunately do often, what if I come off and that gets snagged on something? Like, I don't want that to be caught and now I'm stuck doing that. So I was like, what if there's a way to, so I created a bandana that had a magnetic release to it. Right. And so I went through the process of literally, I don't know how to sew. I watched YouTube videos to figure out how to sew. And then I was like, well, okay, I have this. So I went to my dry cleaner, because she's who usually does my sewing. And I was like, hey, can you help me make something that's this size out of this material, put these magnets in it so I can take it to someone and have them help me make it. But I need something a little bit more professional than the napkin that I sewed together at home. And so my dry cleaner actually created the first prototype. And then I went downtown Los Angeles and knocked on doors, had conversations until I found someone that believed enough in me to help launch the product that is the, elevated equestrian magnetic bandana. And from there, it was like, oh, well, I want this in this color, things of that nature. So it kind of just took off from being able to create a product that was kind of quote unquote need in the industry, especially at the time of COVID. And then it pivoted to back to that experience of wanting to be in public and having people ask me about horses. I was like, is there a way to do like incognito horse apparel, things of that nature, which is where I've come up with a couple like everyday kind of leisure clothing and things like that are just little pings of, something I'm wearing now, but it has this little horse head on it, but it says I love horses in French. Just you can stem that conversation, because once people find out that you are a rider, you speak a different language, you connect on a way with them. And that's what I wanted to thrive on and feed into was that community. Being able to be like, me too, I get it. How was your ride today? Tell me this, and being able to like see each other in public and connect. So a lot of the products that I create are around that kind of space of just the horse girl community and having it kind of be part of your everyday lifestyle. It's kind of how the elevated equestrian was born.
Okay, that's so cool. I actually didn't know the full story about the bandana and whatnot. So I love that. So then you started just being a vendor at shows because you wanted to be part of the community.
Yeah, so I would choose shows based off of where my barn was going. So that way I could be there to still hear my trainer giving them instructions, still watch, ask a bunch of questions. But as far as like learning the different venues and things that are asked of shows and how the classes are run, and then being in that space, I'm obviously meeting a lot of writers, right? And they're kind of coming to my booth and sharing their experiences and their stories and what went well. And I can ask questions about like hunters, like how they're judged. I had no idea, so it's like, why is that person winning? That person looked like they were having a better time. Why did that person win? And being able to ask those questions to kind of in a safe place. And people are so willing to share that information when you're asking the right questions. And I just wanted more of that. Like choose almost every single weekend to be at a show as a vendor, just to be in that community and asking those questions and getting that kind of fill. Because otherwise I wouldn't be able to get it unless I was showing myself.
Okay, that is so, so interesting. I'm thinking about that because, yeah, I'm on a similar, but not similar journey in terms of riding and not showing because I'm learning to jump and I just like to challenge myself, but I don't know that I want to go there. But just going there without showing still gives you the opportunity to learn and experience so much. I went to one that's about a month ago maybe, and just sat with my instructor. She had a lot of students that were showing. And so I just sat with her and she kind of just gives me the lay of the land, right? Because I didn't grow up in that world. I did grow up with horses, but not in that world. And it's different. So I love that. Very creative. Well, then, okay. So we're going to keep stair stepping in your story because that's not the end. So you created Elevated Equestrian and then you needed or wanted riders to wear your apparel. Which is what's going to kind of lead us into this idea of influencer marketing, but kind of tell us how you landed on that. What did that process look like for you?
Yes. So, I mean, as I am a millennial, right? So I know things are sold through the internet. And I understand that I have personally purchased a lot of things because I saw so and so wear them, talk about them, promote them. As someone that's new to the space, I'm constantly reaching out on YouTube and different places to learn things. And you're saddle shopping, and so you have conversation. So it's natural and organic, especially when you're new to a sport, to be leaning on other people for recommendations of things, right? So I knew this, especially being a product that it's not. If you were to see it on a shelf, I don't think you'd be like, oh, right, I need that. It takes a little bit of education behind it of why it's important. And so the best way to deliver that is through content, right? Well, I can sit here and tell you that, inside out and sideways till Tuesday, but you really actually need it coming from someone else's voice, right? Not only that, but I see a lot of people that actually need the product as far as like eventers, especially, they have a very dangerous lifestyle. What can I do to help? You're wearing them and I see that, but that's actually not safe for you to do that. So, here's this product, try this out, see if it helps you better. And then the other thing we deal with a lot is like sun, right? So we get a lot of sun damage, and a lot of people I see them, especially old, they'll unzip their front of their shirt and then they just leave this exposed. And I learned it's actually called the equestrian leather neck, but that's a lot of people are very aged in this space because they don't protect this, right? They need to be cooled down. And so I was like, oh, there's just so much education that needs to happen. I can only do so much. So I started to reach out to different writers that I saw that were talking about various things, whether it was they had skin cancer, safety was a big thing to them. So I started to look for these like keywords of writers and then other quote unquote, equestrian influencers that were already putting together outfits and like, well, here's your extra accessory. Let's see if we can work together and create something where you're sharing this with your audience. And then we're obviously benefiting from it. And then everyone can have this product. And, with anything, there's always the good, bad, and ugly, right? So I saw a few people that just shocked me. They did content far beyond what I had asked of them. And my budget was, $0. Like we're just looking for product placement. And some of them put together amazing things and they went above and beyond. And I was like, you did that for free? And then other ones, you sent them the product. They said they were going to do the things and they never did the things at all. And I got burned multiple times by people not delivering. And what are you going to do? Right? Like have my lawyer call, like, no, that's not a thing, right? You're just kind of out that product and you kind of learn the hard way. So I feel like, and I've kept trying to figure out like, what's the formula to know the type of results you're going to get from that person by just looking at their profile? Like, how can you weed this out a little bit more
Mm-hmm.
before you just blindly send someone product and, God forbid, money. Like, there has to be a better. And I know in the beauty space, the health and wellness industry, there's portals that you can log into and get user generated content. And there's rating systems and it's very cooked. So if you want to kind of flesh out if a beauty influencer is good, there's a place where you can go validate that. There is nothing like that in the equestrian space. And sometimes even what that person thinks good looks like to the brand, I can't use it because your horse actually wasn't tacked up properly. So now I can't promote that because you were sitting on a horse without a helmet. That goes against my brain. It's just all these things that you kind of just start to learn that are like, oh God, and I kept just saying, I wish there was a resource or someone I could make them call to help them flesh out all this stuff. Like, why am I having to do all this education as a brand to try to get this influencer to deliver something that I can use? And I felt like I was just beating my head against the wall. And I was like, there has to be a better way. So I reached the brands that I've made contacts with at these shows. I've reached out to them and said, like, hey, have you ever worked with influencers? How's this looking? Oh, we do an affiliate. And everyone had their own like 2 cents of like what good looks like and what bad looks like. And I was like, okay, but how? And they're like, well, everyone just knows these are the good influencers and you just keep using them. And I'm like, but they're almost becoming like overused, right? It's like an oversaturated market. And then do we really even believe that they want half of the products that they're promoting? Because we all know they're just pushing products. Like it almost becomes, and I said, honestly, I've gotten better content. And I shared a couple ones that were what we call like micro influencers, right? So they have less than 10,000 followers. And like, honestly, when they posted about my content, I had much higher sales, much more active DMs, much more high, the engagement was higher, all the things that you would want. And I'm like, and they had less than 10,000 followers and they got me these results. But because they're not quote unquote branded as an influencer, most people kind of overlook them. But it's just, I personally knew they did good. Well, they did a good job with their content. And so I was just like, oh, there has to be. And so many people then started to ask me for advice and stuff. And I was like, no, I'm still on the struggle bus. Like I am still trying to find the solution to this. I just have made enough contacts at this point that I'm like, I can navigate it well enough. But it's to the point where it's like, but I can't scale this. And all of my contacts are West Coast based. If I'm trying to get into the East Coast equestrian market, it's a significantly different beast. And we kind of go back and forth about even just the language that we speak, right? Things are different. And so I'm like, I can't even tell you how to crack the code on how to work with an equestrian influencer in the East Coast space, but I've met a contact that could. And so then I was just like, well, what, and so the idea became, what if we had some kind of, and at first it was like, what if we have a Facebook group, right? Where we all just kind of like talk about things. Cause even topics that have come up, like working with child influencers is a kind of a hot topic, how to navigate that world. What do you do? What do you do when it goes wrong? And I'm like, God, I wish you could just like log in and like ask these questions or something. And that's where someone's like, oh, maybe we can just create like a Facebook page. I'm like, yeah, that'd be great. But like, are we really actually going to be like in there teaching each other thing? It'll just be kind of like I don't want it to be like a place where we just all complain, like, something like that. I was like, it needs to have more value than that. And so I started to think about like, what would it actually mean to have a platform where brands and influencers could have resources, cooked on-demand training where they could log on whatever you are struggling with, put it in the search bar, find a training on it, watch the training on it. And then in the training, you're probably actually going to be exposed to someone that specializes in that and can help you grow. And say you're a writer that recently became professional and now you want to work with brands. How do you get sponsorship, right? How would you figure that out? Are you going to ask your trainer? Like, what does that process look like? Well, you could go to the Social Equestrian and look that up and find the resources. And hey, maybe you actually want to work with someone that's going to help take on your social media for you and help promote you. Things like that. So that's kind of where the idea of creating the portal for having brands and influencers connected, but then also having it be almost like a marketplace where if I'm a brand and I'm launching a new product or I'm needing an influencer, I can post that need into the community. And then there's going to be a job board where the influencers can go on and see, oh, this brand is actually looking for this and connect them that way as well. So that way they can actually get hired and do deals and, continue to grow their community and the brands can grow their influencer space, but on a joint platform where they can both kind of access what the needs are. And same thing, influencers can then post their bios and their resumes and talk about all the things that they're looking for and what they specialize in. Because a lot of times when they're heading to these events, they have a few sponsors lined up, but maybe they're missing a shirt sponsor, or maybe they're missing a glasses sponsor or something like that, where they can be like, hey, I'm currently working with these brands and this thing. If there's a helmet company that wants to, jump on this bandwagon, we're already going to be there creating the content. And then it's going to be, much cheaper for that brand to be able to jump on because they're not having to pay all the production fees that's already in place. So that is the
Oh,
dream of the social equestrian. But that's where the need is, because there's so much to it and it's constantly changing, right? You just get one little twist of an algorithm and
you're right.
everything falls to the wayside, reels versus carousels, how to do all these things. AI is becoming a big thing. It's constantly moving. And I just don't feel like there's enough resources out there that we can point people to that are going to be a consistent voice in the equestrian space. Cause that's the biggest thing. We speak a different language. Things need to be addressed and spoken to us differently than someone trying to sell makeup in a beauty industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my gosh, so much good stuff. Okay, for those of you listening, so this is all just Megan's intro story, right? So I wanted you guys to know why I invited her here to talk about these things and talk specifically to brands and specifically to influencers about how you're doing these brand partnerships and marketing together and how you can do it strategically. But I want you to know more about the social equestrian as well. So we're going to tag the end of this episode with even more information so that you can find out. But if you're listening and you're like already getting out your phone and looking it up, I want you to go to stormlily.com/influencer because Megan has given me a link where you're going to find all the things there. So if you're listening, as you listen, if you're pulling out your phone, go ahead and go there, but keep listening because before you even start applying those things, I want you to be able to apply what you're going to learn here. So Megan is going to talk to us more about what it looks like for influencers, what it looks like for brands to do these partnerships well, because very likely you could go in and join the social equestrian and still not get the full fruit and benefit of it. So I want you guys to hear from her what she has seen and experienced so that you know how to do this well for your business, whether you're a brand or I know some of you, honestly, we have some overlap. So this would be an interesting kind of to hear your feedback on this, but as far as what people consider a brand. So, for example, I have a client who is a horse trainer, and so they have their own business, so they would be a brand, right? How they're performance sources. However, they also would what you would be considering the micro influencer. They do weekly lives. They have a tack shop in their facility. And so they are recommending products all the time. And so they kind of are tiptoeing on both sides. So do you see that a lot and experience that a lot, Megan?
100%. Because the other thing is you get a lot of these quote unquote writers or influencers who are also then trying to launch their own brand or product or versions of it. Like there's a couple, like we'll say a soccer company that does collaborations with people. So then it's also like, well, what about that? So because we initially, when I was thinking about the platform, I was going to have it separate that influencers and brands log into two different separate portals, right? And I wanted to keep it because there's not always I don't think influencers necessarily always care about QuickBooks. They should, but they don't. So I was like, posting that content going to be only valuable for brands. And then as I'm like going through the content, working with the experts that I've been delivering, I was like, so much of this, both sides need to hear it. And there is so much tiptoe back and forth between the things. And not only that, but the more each other can do to put the other person's hat on, the better the deliverables will always be. So as an influencer, you need to understand as a brand, what do we care about? We care about selling product and ROI. That's what we care, right? We need to make money. That's what we care about. What does an influencer care about from a brand? So it's like the more you can do to kind of put yourself in the other person's shoes, the better it's going to be. So I was like, I think they actually need to share resources. I think that there's a lot of people that tiptoe back and forth. I think some of the top trainers are fabulous at educating and creating content. They just haven't maybe been given the platform to do so or thought that they could provide enough value. Like I even know the girl that I work with who does body works on my horse, the amount of times I've like had sessions with her that I'm like, I walk away knowing so much information. I was like, one day I asked her, can I just record these? And she's like, what would you do with them? I'm like, share them with everyone that has, needs horse, like that doesn't understand the value of what you do. And I was like, and she's just like, you think people would be interested in? I'm like, you have no idea. Like one of the people that's helping us with the social question, she is a bit specialist, and it's just like, have you ever struggled in that? Like, do you know that there's experts? And it's just like, I had no idea. And it's like, until you're kind of exposed to that, you don't even know that it's a problem. So kind of circling back, yes, I do absolutely think there's resources that need to be shared on both ends. I think leading with education on all fronts is fantastic. I think there's a lot of opportunities because even some of these barns that are like just sponsored by these saddle companies, like, do you know how much more your sponsorship could probably increase if you created content for them and gave it back to, you know what I mean? Like, just think about like CWD sponsors a lot of brands or a lot of barns, just think about what that would mean or how much more likely they'd be able to give you a higher discount on the next saddle that you order if you gave them back user generated content of why your barn chooses to use CWD. It's little things like that. So I think kind of just putting your hat on and kind of thinking about the opposite side of it, which is really what I want the platform to do, is open your eyes to who's actually being the consumer of it and what do they really want, and
Yeah.
how can we deliver that.
Yeah, I love it. Okay. So that being said, I know that you have kindly put together some tips and strategies that we want influencers to remember and brands to remember. So listeners, we are going to separate this out and it will be on the show notes, of course, for this episode, which is stormlily.com/137. And so you can head there and get the highlights of this conversation if you are mucking stalls, which I know many of you are doing when you listen to podcasts. I hear that all the time. So tell us, Megan, let's specifically talk to those who are influencers. What are some things that you believe they need to remember and consider or do as they are working with brands and marketing their own personal brand as an influencer?
Absolutely. And I know we focus a lot. I say Instagram a lot. When I say Instagram, I mean all social media platforms, right? So just keep that as a caveat. But the biggest thing, influencers, the number one thing I want to tell them is your profile is your resume. So when I interact with you, or I find out, or someone, oh, so-and-so's a writer, they do this, they do X, the first thing we all do, right, is go to social media and put in the search tab to find this person. Okay, so now I found it. Or maybe you sent me the link to it and I got it that way. Okay, so now I'm looking at their profile. And what I see far too often is just tons of photos of you on a horse. Great. Where do you want me to start? How do I know? Okay, I can figure out what type of riding that you do from your photos. Great. But what kind of journey do you want me to have to experience you as a person? When's your next show? What are you working on? Who are you? What's your horse's name? Where do you live? If I can't get these type of answers, you're leading it to me to start just clicking through things. So what do we naturally do? Well, what I do is I go to the Reels tab and I see which ones have the highest views and I watch those. And that's how I make a decision about who you are as a person, is that way. Sometimes people in their bios will just be like, cute little quotes, where they ride, what zone they're in, things of that nature. But it really isn't actually answering any of the questions of who you are, what are you doing, where are you going, what do you want, how can I work with you, why would I work with you? And so I think the biggest miss a lot of times is just that they don't think back to what it's like when someone finds you either organically or through a referral, or what it's like for someone to stumble upon your content, right? So maybe you did like a reel that went viral. We all do it. Then you click over that person's profile and you see what else they have to offer. What are their funny ones? What else do they have? And then sometimes it's just like, well, nothing. There's no value to be added here. That was just the one funny reel, and I click off of it and we go someplace else. And I don't think anything of it again. So the more you can do to use your profile as a resume and answer those questions for the person that's finding you, whether it's a brand or a follower. Who are you? What do you stand for? What are you doing? What type of content are you going to be posting? Little things like adding text to your images, your cover images. So why would I click on best day of my life, worst day of my life, something I learned? Just use these words, put the things on. So I know, why am I even clicking on that piece of content? Because otherwise I'm probably just going to click on the one with the pretty saddle pad, one with your biggest smile on your face. I just randomly choosing things, unless you allow the customer to, or community to go through that journey, right? So the more you can do to kind of set that up for them. So that's what the freebie that I created for you was, really kind of how to optimize your profile, digging a little deeper, utilizing highlights, pin to post, things of that nature. I just see a lot of people don't use those features, and it's a miss to me. It's the easiest way to capture your audience's attention and guide them to what you want, is just by having those things set up in place. And none of it's very hard to do. It's just a matter of pinning the post, which is a 2-step process. You click that one and you click pin. I mean, it's not hard, but I think that's a huge miss that I see influencers doing, is not focusing on using their profile as a resume.
Okay, that's so good. And honestly, as you say that, I'm thinking it's a good reminder for those listening to have that intention, right? So some people are just, like you said, they're just posting because it's fun. But if you are saying, look, I do want to work with brands, I do have aspirations, then sit back and just evaluate and get that intention behind every piece of content that you create. So yeah, I love that. So good. Okay, what else do you have?
Okay, so as an influencer, understanding what brands want is going to be a huge value add, right? And not only understanding what they want out of their content as far as like maybe like a visual example, but return on investment is what all brands use as their metric to figure out if you are of value or not. And unfortunately, a lot of weight is put on, say you do one post promoting one product, however much sales are generated post that post is how they're valuing you as an influencer. And you have to understand that. So what can you do to help that brand feel like they had value when they worked with you, right? Because you can't necessarily track the sales. Yes, you can use codes and try to do it that way. Yes, that's something you can do, but it's not always how it works, right? And a lot of times with influencers, they think they can just post it once and get all these sales. And unfortunately, that's not how the sales cycle works. I don't know. I mean, if you can think back to the last thing that you purchased, how many times you probably either had to see it or hear about it or research it before you actually pulled the trigger on the product. And I kind of use a rule of thumb of $25. So if it's under $25, you can usually do that pretty quickly, right? That's one click. I don't even think anything of that. Over $25 usually takes a multiple step touch point, which to me is everything in the equestrian space, right? So kind of understanding that for brands. So the more you can do to kind of show them your metrics afterwards of your engagement, the amount of DMs that you received asking these questions, the more you can give back to the brand to show your audience was interested, you got feedback, you got the thing, like if it didn't equal a purchase, that's still valuable to me as a brand to know what questions customers asked you after that, because they're going to reach out to the influencer, not the brand necessarily, right? So the more you can do to kind of give back what the brands want, the better it's going to set you up to be something that they want to continue to work with. And even if it doesn't equal sales, again, providing education, showing a different way to wear it, providing value in different ways is also a huge value add to brands, but you kind of just need to remind them of that, because otherwise what we see is we sent money out the door and didn't get a bunch of sales that afternoon. So I immediately say that didn't work. I won't do that again. And that's not always the case. You can't just make that decision based off of that.
Yeah. Okay. You may address this later, but you said something and made me have a question on behalf of the audience listening. Do you find that influencers, when you have an agreement with a brand, it's saying like a certain number of posts will be agreed upon? Like you mentioned, some people think that they just need to do one post. Like when you have an agreement with an influencer, do you typically specify the type of content or the numbers of the type of content? How does that tend to look?
Yeah. So if you're willing to pay, you can have more say is kind of how it works.
Yeah.
So if you're have a monetary agreement with the influencer, you usually have an agreed upon deliverable, right? So let's pretend you're going to pay $1,000 for 3-story view or 3-story posts, a carousel post, and a reel or something of that nature. You agree to the amount of content that they're going to create for a monetary amount. What gets challenging is a lot of brands, especially when they start working with influencers, they're just doing product placement. They're just doing something where it's free product for something. Right. And at that point, the ask can't be super high, right? I can't say, please make me 3 reels out of a free $100 product. That's not really fair to the person creating the content. So if you're willing to pay, you get more access to things like that. But then on the flip side, now I'm a brand, I just paid all this money and I get these deliverables and I want results. Right. Where it is. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, which is where a lot of brands just prefer to do kind of sponsored things where they just give free product for placement because it's not as much skin in the game if you must. But from that, then there's not as much results. It's kind of how that unfortunately that works out too.
Do you see them doing, and if you can be like, Denise, I'm already talking about that in the brands, just wait. Then
no,
that's
you're perfect.
Totally fine.
Yeah, go ahead.
But so I have a friend not in the equestrian space, who actually kind of blew up on TikTok on like in the space of like motherhood and those types of things. And so she started getting a bunch of requests, but it was paying her items sold. So do you see that as well on the equestrian side? And what does that tend to look like?
So there is a little bit of that, but it's so much harder on the equestrian space because a lot of the e-commerce on this side is still up and coming. Like a amount of brands that I've run into that aren't using like platforms like Shopify and things like that. Like they're just using old school POS systems that make programs like that extremely challenging to do. So most of them don't do that, as from what I've seen on the equestrian space, because it's a pretty challenging metric to track. Unless you have a really good back end of the website, which is just kind of not the case, unfortunately, in this world. And a lot of our stuff that we're kind of promoting and selling and talking about is very expensive. So it's different than someone like, in the home space, like she's selling like, let's say baby bottles or something, she can sell a lot of baby bottles. The margin on that's fantastic. They can, it just makes a little bit more sense in kind of that consumer side versus in the equestrian space. There's just not as much margin usually built into it.
Mm-hmm.
That we're kind of in a different beast of that. But topics like this are things that I would love to kind of hear how other, what I mean? Like I only know from my experience that the answer
Right.
to that. I'm sure if you
Sure.
call, some of the huge equestrian companies, they might have a completely different answer. And I'm sure it's changed too, because a lot of people that used to do things one way have now kind of started to
Right.
update how
Yeah.
they're doing things just because like brand ambassadors used to be a really big thing a few years ago. And now a lot of people are pulling away from brand ambassador programs because it's a bunch of babysitting at the end of the day. You have to like organize and rah ha ha and get everyone to do all their things. And it's a lot of work for what, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think a lot of people start to revisit that ROI wise and to see if it's really of value.
Yeah. Okay. That's so good. All right. Thanks for answering those questions. I took you off course. Okay.
No, it's okay. Yeah.
All right. What
So
else?
just, I
Yeah.
mean, influencers in general, like you have to treat yourself like a business too. Like I know,
Mm,
you technically think the brand is the business, but if you're truly, and I'm not even saying this in the sense that like, oh, you treat it like a business, you need to be worrying about your profit and ROI. Like, yes, of course, but more just how you follow up with and interact with people. Just know that you're representing, you are a brand, right? So being proactive about following up with them, like just remember these are humans on the other side of the computer too. Like just because we look like we're, big, well-run brands does not, like I've met a lot of them in person. They are not, they're single, female owned companies that are
mm-hmm.
surviving. And the more you can do to be proactive and make things easier for that person, be proactive about the type of questions that they're going to ask, have things pre-cooked, make it very easy to find answers to things. And treating the more you do that, the easier you are to work with, the more we're going to want to work with you and the more I'm going to want to give you. Right. If you
Mm-hmm.
just save me 15 minutes of having to do something, my $15 hour, here's that rate for you versus me. Like so being
Right.
proactive, having strong business acumen. Another thing is always delivering more than what's asked of you. Right. So if
Mm,
your contract, even if you had a contract, say you're paid $1,000 for 6 posts, give them 8, right? Give them a different, say, hey, while I was creating this, I also was able to capture this B-roll. I don't know if you want to use it or not, but we thought it was really funny and it presents the product in a different light. So always deliver back more than you're asked. You will be asked back to the table every single time because not only did you over deliver, but I'm also not going to be as concerned about the ROI if I have extra content to use. That's one less influencer I now need
mm.
to go pay and work with because you gave me even extra content. Or, while we were at the barn, this happened. We were filming the content. Oh my gosh, you should really do this. And oh, well, I was there. So and so asked me this question. So we created a reel and answered it for you. Hopefully you can use it. Things like that will go a long way. And I will be the first one to recommend you to somebody else because you went above and beyond for me without even being asked. Right.
Yeah. That's so,
Um,
so good. That idea of surprise and delight. Right.
yes. Yes. And I think it's just
Yeah.
something we kind of forget because we live such in a virtual world. Like you kind of just forget, like in the real world, you would do this, right? Like you're just a good person,
Yeah.
but like in the virtual world, I think people kind of forget like how much little things like that matter and how it can make a difference and how that it can almost 10x your results by just doing those little things of just over delivering. And even if
Mm-hmm.
it's just like not necessarily creating extra, but creating it a different way, putting on a different shirt and showing it in a different light. Oh, actually, we photographed it with this one like you asked for, but actually I had this white shirt. It looked really good with that too. Hopefully you can use it. Here you go. That's nothing to do that, but it's a huge value add to the person receiving the content.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. Next is an email list. So I don't care what side of the fence you are on, an influencer, brand, writer, whatever, you need to be focusing on growing your email list because again, I know we are all leveraging these platforms. We're all using these platforms to grow and do all the things. But I don't know how long you've been around, but I remember days where Facebook didn't work. I remember days where you couldn't log into Instagram. I remember having multiple friends have their followers deleted, getting hacked, all the things. I have seen it all at this point. You cannot rely on these. We don't own these platforms. We don't pay to be on these platforms. They can change things at any point, and you don't own that. And if you were an influencer or a writer, working with these brands and these kind of like how else were you if you only DM'd them, how else would you communicate with them if you ever had an issue that the platform went down? Right. So you need to be having an email list. It's also going to help you be able to sell and promote your products that you're influencing and talking about if you have a space to share it. Because a lot of times on Instagram, we try to make it as easy as possible to shop. But a lot of times I'll like just screenshot things and come back to it later. And then I'm like, well, crap, now I don't have the link because I just screenshotted it. So now I have to go to Google and look, you know what I mean? So just make it easier for your audience. Hey guys, I just posted about this. If I had your email address, now I have it in my email. Now it's an action item. I'm on my computer. I have my wallet. This is much easier to check out if I had their contact in a different way. It's also going to be a huge value add to the brand that you work with to say, hey, I will also blast it out to my email list. I have, even if it's small, 150 followers or subscribers. I don't, you know what I mean? Like value add is value add. So even just being able to say that I also have an email list, I post once a month to it, my top favorite roundup of outfits that I wore or whatever it is. But having an email list, even as an influencer, I think is something that's kind of overlooked. I do think a lot of people are going to start to realize like why it's important as these platforms continue to change and we kind of lose the ability to make decisions on them. Like when they want to take away our music button, it happens, right? And there's not much you can do about it. So how are you going to deliver your content if you couldn't get your kitschy reel audio that you wanted, right? Well, now I have an email list that I can still send the content to, still get in front of my customers, have a link right there that they can shop and make it so much easier.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You're speaking my language. I love that. That's so, so true. But you're so right. And especially brands may hear it and go, okay, I can figure that out. But influencers, I feel like sometimes will struggle with like understanding the value behind it and how they can add value to their email list and to their people and make it something exclusive and insider access type thing. And yeah, the opportunity for that is huge, huge, huge for influencers.
And it's not going away. It's been one of those things like tried and true. Email lists continue to be, and when I say email lists, I also mean, because nowadays it's texting too, right? Most email service providers, you can add the text component to it too, that if people prefer to find out, oh, I just tried on these breeches, they're so great. Here's my promo code, access them here, little things like that. So when I say email, I also mean text. But just, yes. And it's not that hard to set up. It's not even expensive at this point. Like it is, It's very obtainable. In 30 minutes, you could have something set up and in another 30 minutes, you could have a content plan for the rest of your year planned out of what you're going to post.
Right? Look at you. I love it. I love it. So good. Okay. Anything else you have for influencers specifically?
Yes. So, another thing that I see, and again, I'm kind of going to caveat like those influencers that we all know are influencers, right? That are constantly promoting products and doing all the things and stuff. Like they're branded that way. The niche of the social equestrian is going to be a little bit of the under that. Right. These are the ones that are a little bit more authentic with their audiences. They're kind of dabbling in this space. And they might feel that they're going to be kind of awkward with presenting the products. So the biggest thing to do is get your audience's buy-in and have it be a story when you're presenting something that you're going to be selling to them. Because a lot of people are like, I just like riding horses. I'm actually an introvert. I'm not good at sales. But I was like, okay, talk me through the last time that you purchased something. Like, what did you do? You probably asked a friend, right? Have you ever experienced this? Have you written, let's just say helmets. So you're looking at a helmet. So you go and you talk to your friends. Oh, what helmet do you like? Why do you like that one? Then you go to the tack store, you talk to them, you get their advice, you get their, oh, well, what about this color? So you get their buy-in, right? Treat your audience that same way. Like you're having a conversation with them. You're thinking about switching your dog's food. Okay, great. So what are the different things you need to consider before you switch your dog's food? What is the research that you're going to go through? Hey guys, have you ever heard this brand or this? Have them vote on things. I'm putting together this outfit. Do you like it in green or do you like it in this? Start to create the content where you're getting the audience invested in the outcome before you drop anything that you're going to sell. So even if you already have the solution in place, you already have that helmet at home that you got from the company that you're going to be talking about, but get the buy-in. Why? Because it had the best safety rating. Why does that matter? Have you guys ever had, this? You guys know you're supposed to replace your helmets every 5 years. Are you doing that? Put a little poll up. Have you guys done this? Get them to have a need for the product before you drop it. And I honestly think using those like engagement buttons, asking people to vote for things, asking people's opinions on things, people love to tell you their opinion on things, is only going to help. So then when you talk about this product, you're like, oh my gosh, we were just talking about, yes, we were. It was very curated and very planned. But, and I know there's that phenomenon, right? Like if you're shopping for a red car and all of a sudden you see all these red cars, you're like, right. I need a red car. Everyone, And it's a sort of real thing, but it's going to also help increase when you drop that content. The engagement's already there. The algorithms are already learning that this is what you're talking about. You're already training the community and you're priming them. So then when you drop it, it's a solution. It's not you pushing a product. And it's just going to go over significantly better. And the conversation is going to be there. Your customer, your community is going to ask you the questions of things that you were already planning on to talk about anyway. And it just makes it a lot more organic when you can make it a conversation with the buy-in. And it helps increase engagement immensely if you kind of do it through like a storytelling aspect of it.
Okay, that's so good. I love that idea of telling stories. For those of you who have listened some, I've talked about Donald Miller. He has a book about using stories in your marketing and how it's key. And it's so true. People love stories. We're pulled into that. It builds connections. So that's really good.
Awesome. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be, like I said, it doesn't have to be anything crazy. Like it just organically, like, what did you think about? What did you put into Google to get those? Tell me about that. And people are so like, I think you forget how much people love that kind of behind the scenes of like the thought process. Cause then sometimes they're like, me too. And I say that all the time. I'm like, me too. Like, that's what I thought too. Or, I zoomed in and was like, is that how that should look? And so the more you can do to feed into that nature of people, it's how we all make decisions. And then when you promote something, I now going to believe you did your research. I now going to believe it's a lot more authentic, even if you're paid to post it. I don't care. I believe it because you showed me what that looked like to you. You showed me that journey.
Yeah, that's so good.
Okay, so that's the end of my influencer thing.
Okay.
But ultimately, just being authentic, adding value, sprinkling stuff in, goes a lot farther than just constantly buy this, look at this new thing, look at this new shiny new thing. Add value, connect. The whole word social is there for a reason. Don't forget that.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, these are so good. Okay. So influencers who are listening, if you have questions, I want you to send them. Or of course, I want you to go to stormlily.com/influencer to find more of these resources and things like that. And I will quickly give another link, which I will have on the show notes, because Megan did mention a free resource she kindly has put together to help you guys to really optimize the bio in your profile, in your social profile. So if you head to the show notes, stormlily.com/137, or if you just go straight to stormlily.com/bio, she has an amazing free resource put together just for podcast listeners. So I want you guys to get that. Whether you're an influencer or a brand, you're going to want this resource so that you can really optimize your bio. All right, friends, what did I tell you? I am sure that you love Megan as much as I do right now and are so grateful for her experience and her insights and her willingness to share openly all of the things that she has learned working with influencers, and as she has studied what influencers are doing in preparation for the Social Equestrian. For those of you who are saying, I own a brand and now I want to know, how do I work with influencers? What should that look like? And what tips and strategies do you have for me? That I want you to stay tuned, because next week's episode is for you. So for now, head to stormlily.com/137 for 137, and you can get the highlights of today's episode. And of course, please head to stormlily.com/influencer so that you can be one of the first to sign up for the Social Equestrian, get the education you need, and especially get connected to a community that is full of brands and influencers. And you guys can work together and you can find the people that are the best fit for you. It makes it easy. That's the thing. So many influencers are saying, I want to work with brands. How do I find the right ones? And brands are saying, how do I find the right influencer that's a fit for me and my company? The Social Equestrian is making it happen. So head to stormlily.com/influencer and find out all the things and get signed up now. And then make sure you are subscribed to the podcast, because next week, brands, we're coming for you. All right. Have an amazing day, friends. I will talk to you soon.